Good afternoon, and welcome to our first part of the 3-speaker series on building an age-inclusive New York City. I'm Maritza Arroyo, Assistant Commissioner for Public-Private Partnerships at the New York City Department for the Aging, and welcome once again, fellow civil servants. As you may know, DIFTA, right? Short for New York City Department for the Aging. We serve over 1.64 million New York City older adults, and that's growing exponentially. We partner with over 400 community-based organizations to provide services to our older adults, as well as advocating to combat ageism so that we can create a New York City that is age-friendly and age-inclusive, helping older adults age in place and thrive in their communities. Public-private partnerships, our office, exists to further that mission. And this is one of our first initiatives, building an age-inclusive New York City, that we rolled out with our sister agency, DCAS. And welcome, I see several of you on today. Thank you so much for your partnership. And why building an age-inclusive New York City? Well, the world is getting older, right? We currently now have 5 generations working in our workforce, right? A really multi-generational workforce. And so it's really an imperative that we combat ageism, and that age is included in DEI efforts is one of the last isms not to be addressed. We're really happy to see, in partnership with DCAS and Commission of Human Rights, the first rollout of age discrimination trainings for all city workers. So our aim in having these 3-part series, which you requested in the last survey and in the events that we had earlier this spring, was to get more support, more knowledge on how to include age-inclusive practices and strategies in your diversity plans. So today is the first part. We're going to be focused on recruitment and selection. And so you're going to hear from one of our subject matter experts, Savima Al-Nashar. She's amazing. Today you can expect to learn quite a bit in terms of, ages versus age-inclusive practices and strategies. It's going to be very interactive. So definitely, engage, raise your hand, use the chat, and we're going to have some breakout rooms. And so have great fun, learn a lot. I'm so excited for today. And it's my pleasure now to present my wonderful colleague, Yvette Santiago, who's going to give us an overview of the past events and another poll so we can learn more from you. Thank you and have a great day.
Hi, everyone. Thank you for joining. So great to be with you all today. Just a little recap of the past events we had on March 13th and March 24th and April 13th. And many of you attended those events and some of you weren't able to attend. We had an average of about 113 participants in 64 city agencies. So it was a great turnout for both events. And the event on March 24th, we focused on, it was titled The Imperative. It was an overview of ageism, ageist practices, and age discrimination. And we brought in a CEO of the American Society on Aging. And he left us with a really powerful quote that his grandmother shared with him. "Where you are, I was, and where I am, you will be." So we're continuing to sort of keep that in mind, that we're all in this together as a collective. And we're really thankful for all of our sister agencies that show up, that are interested in the conversation and interested in implementing ageist practices. And in this, the second part of the series, we called it Putting into Practice. We brought in a gerontologist and a leadership strategist and walked away with key tips on how to implement DEI strategies. So as Maritza mentioned, the next 3 sessions are going to be focused on the diversity plan. And we'd like to kick this off by kicking off a poll, a survey, and just to gauge a temperature check on where you are in developing the plans. So I'm going to kick off the poll right now. So it's a 2-part poll. Can everyone see that? Okay, I see some. Great. Wow. So we have, yeah. So lots of folks have been focused on the plan and developing it. This is great to hear. Just a minute or so more. We have some responses still coming in. Okay, so it seems as if 33% are at 100% complete. So it's a balance between those completed 75 to 100% of the plan. And then if 50% completed, so those that have 50% completed, have they included ageless practices? 58% said yes, they have. So that's great, great, great. You guys are rolling up your sleeves and getting down to business. Thanks so much for sharing that. I'm going to end this poll right now and hand it back over to Maritza. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Yvette. That is so exciting that 58% of you have already included age into your diversity plans. So we really hope that this will also help, right? Enhance what you've already included. And we have 2 more of these series, one in July and one in August, so stay tuned. Now, it's my great pleasure to introduce my colleague, Savim El-Nishar. Savim is currently the Senior Director of our Older Adult Workforce here at DIFTA. She was raised on the Canadian West Coast, where she was a civil servant for 12 years, mostly in leadership positions. There, she addressed labor market integration of underserved communities. She also was an EE&D officer supporting intergovernmental programming. After moving to New York City, Savim got involved with community activism around educational access, and she continued in that field as a director of education and employment programs in the nonprofit sector for several years before joining New York City civil service. She holds a master's degree in political economy of labor and is a trained coach, fluent in 3 languages, and she is most proud of being a mom to her 3 children. Thank you so much for your time today, Savim.
Thank you. Thanks, Yvette and Maritza, and of course, everyone who's here today on the Zoom call. So a real special thank you to Maritza and Yvette, our DIFTA public-private partnerships team, for really putting this together. I feel very honored to be here today and share with you my experience working in the space of diversity and inclusion. Yes, way back when it was called EED at the time. So now that even that term has evolved. So the concept of inclusion has been around for some time, and I think we can all say we are versed in much of the language, but where we often get challenged is how do we incorporate our inclusive lens into actions that lead to our desired results? And hopefully by the end of today's presentation, you will have some takeaways that can be applied to your work environment. So I want to approach today's discussion in 3 parts. 1, our values and our beliefs. 2, recruitment and selection, which will be most of the presentation. And finally, workplace challenge and how to be more age inclusive. So the first one is our values and beliefs are just a series of deep held ideologies. They're social conditioning and messaging we've come to accept as truth, even without proof. And so the first challenge we have is to check in with ourselves. And what values do we hold and why? Where do we get our truths from? And why do we still hang on to them? A great tool for this exercise I've come to use every so often is the Harvard Implicit Bias Test. You can go in, it's free, it's accessible. We can send the link a little bit after. And you go in and you check, you do a series of exercises to see where you may still have some bias and what you may still need to work on, because let's be honest, we still have these unconscious bias sometimes that we carry, because it's hard to tease out things that have been with us for years. Implicit bias is an automatic reaction we have towards other people. These are attitudes that can negatively impact our understanding, our actions, and our decision-making. The fact that people may discriminate unintentionally continues to have implications for understanding disparities in so many aspects of our society, including organizational practices like hiring and promotion. And this is exactly why we're all here today. And to do that, we first need to get real familiar with being uncomfortable. And that is a big challenge we have to individually go through as we are all in this space. We have to recognize what privilege may have afforded afforded us in our own career journey. And I'll take a moment to speak just about my experience. And I just want to make sure everyone's okay, that this is a really safe space to share it and their experiences. I started my professional career very young, and I was often perceived as energetic, moldable, the shiny new hire, etc. And as such, I had opportunities not afforded to my colleagues who had been really dedicated professionals for some time. And I had a moment of reckoning one day when I had come to work, and there were all these different promotional opportunities that were put on hold, but mine, for whatever reason, was approved. Everybody else's was declined. And there was a staff meeting about this. And it was just that weight was on me. And shortly after that meeting, I decided to walk into the director's office and ask, why me? And I didn't get really a straight answer. But in that moment, I realized, the work environment could be really different for different individuals. And I started to notice a lot of different patterns of ageism and other types of discrimination. And I was on the privileged side of that discriminatory practice. I began to look more closely at the mandatory trainings often that we're all, required to take, and the learnings that we're all required to participate in were just not enough. They were not enough to stretch my thinking. And oftentimes I had to really start looking at the experiences of my colleagues to fully understand what was happening. And then over time, as I started to take on leadership opportunities, I started to feel that my leadership position had this unwritten weight to them. And that weight was, I had a duty as a leader towards others beyond just the job description itself. I had to learn to speak out and up when discrimination was present. And in one instance, I'm going to be really honest with you, that weight was so heavy. And I decided to challenge an ageist decision. And it was also definitely a racist decision as well. And I paid a very heavy price for it professionally. However, I do feel that in all of my experiences, that was one of the few moments where I really felt that I had to use my voice. And it was so critical, even if it was going to cost me, because it was costing someone else significantly more. So today is really about recognizing that we have agency in combating ageism in the workplace. And that's really important for all of us to know that we do have that power. And to put action behind the words, the reports, the data on employment equity and diversity, inclusion, all of that does have weight that we all have to carry. I want also to start by acknowledging that we're all fallible. And then in this space is for us to learn and to grow. And a really nice quote that I often have in mind is that if we want to learn, you need to grow. And good leaders are always good learners. So with that said, I hope you consider this to be a safe space for learning, for sharing, and for growing. And that we will have more opportunities throughout this presentation today to actually be engaging in conversation discussion. So the next thing I want to really talk into is all the different generations that we're all hearing about. So we've heard many times we're in the most unique workforce moment in many in history. We have 5 generations in the workplace. The opportunities are endless that this presents. And with that, of course, yes, it's amazing to work with so many different generations, but there's a lot of myths out there, especially around older adult workers. So let's cover a little bit some of these top 4 myths. So let me quickly just reference here. So according to SRHM, the myths in the multi-generational workplace include 1, intelligence continues and evolves. Myth 1, younger workers perform better than older ones. Myth 2, companies can't afford to retain baby boomers and other experienced workers. Myth 3, business and HR leaders are making age diversity a high priority. And myth 4, by declining to retire, older employees are taking jobs from younger ones. Unfortunately, these are actually really common that many actually assume that they're truths. Just want to touch base on each myth real quickly. Myth 1, intelligence is continuous and it evolves, including wisdom, experience, and ability very much remain stable and often increase with our lifespan. Myth 2, older workers are often much more conscientious of their time spent at work and their sense of purpose in the workplace. Not so much this fixation on, staying in position strictly for salary. The third myth, which I think is a really interesting one, business and HR leaders are making age diversity a high priority. So this is a very interesting statistic. 64% of CEOs today report having diversity inclusion initiatives as part of their plan. However, only 8% include age discrimination. So I think we have a long ways to go still. And the last one, which is, anyone who's studied economics will understand, we don't have this fixed amount of jobs. Jobs in industries are infinite. Over time, we've seen a lot of different new and emerging industries. So there isn't this fixed job, market. And then once folks retire, other folks step in. The economy is much more fluid than this. So when we have this situation here where we have a lot of myths, and at the same time, we speak a lot about this multi-generational workplace, how do we really address the various workers, and how do we improve our recruitment and selection process to make sure we're inclusive and we're mindful of the ageism that's happening? So I want to cover 3 main areas, which is recruitment systems, the job postings itself, and the assessment and interview process. So let's talk a little bit about the first one. In recruitment, oftentimes, many of us have heard of the applicant tracking system, the automated system that either you love it or you hate it, because it's either bringing in talented folks or it's preventing many talented individuals from being able to apply to employment opportunities. So in the most simplistic term, really, the system, especially PeopleSoft, which is many of us are what we're familiar with, is a system. It's a software system, and it could have a different type of interface depending on how you design it. And PeopleSoft does have the ability to be accessible, meaning there are certain accessible standards that could be incorporated if the end user, whoever is contracting, wants to put those in place. And I'll give you some examples of what some other users, private sector or other bureaucracies who do use the system, have put in place. Some have put something, if you see on the right-hand side of the screen, there's this accessibility menu option. And so you can select what are some of the accessibility needs that you may have so that the software can be better, more responsive to your ability to apply for a position. Others have done things such as providing a hotline number so you can actually speak to an individual. Some process will actually have an email account so you can actually contact the hiring panel. Some also have specific ways of making sure they can source out different applicants because it reads from other software systems. One organization, for example, I came across has an accessibility center with live support. At any time of the day when you are trying to apply for a vacancy, there is an individual who can speak with you. And finally, the data capture, or some will call it the funnel process, which is at every stage, the system is able to identify when individuals are able to get through the different steps of that application process. This is data that if you're trying to mine data to find out who's actually applying and who's becoming successful, if you're an HR practitioner, if you're a hiring manager, this is critical. And so when we look at it and we're interacting with a system like ATS, if you view it simply as a platform for application, and then you put all of these other systems in place to ensure that it is accessible, it can actually be an amazing tool for us. So once an individual applies through the online system, the next challenge really becomes the job posting itself. And so what I decided to do is actually go through a lot of the civil service job postings that we currently have. And it was really interesting to see. I was overwhelmed actually to see how inconsistent many of the job postings were across the different agencies, and sometimes within the same agency. Some had ageist and biased language. I saw very specific references to recent graduation with specific names of courses and credits. And I don't know about you, but I certainly can't recall when is the last time I took a specific course in a university. It's been decades for me personally. Certainly there are job postings that are geared towards recent graduates, and it does not indicate it's some sort of graduate type of recruitment campaign. It's very specific to just the language of this. Job descriptions that are misaligned with actual qualifications section. Preferred skills are mixed in with abilities and knowledge and experience. There's a lot of emphasis also on recent work experience in the past year, and working with older adults. Oftentimes this is where there is that separation where many of the older adults, at least in the programs that I work with, may have been disengaged from the labor for some time. So being able to apply for a government position that requires recent experience within the past year will be in itself a challenge, almost nearly impossible. So, maybe we'll take a moment here just to kind of switch, because I really want to be able to interact with everyone. And we want to do something called a Jamboard. Is everyone familiar with something called a Jamboard? I know I can't see everyone, but if you pop into the little chat box. So the Jamboard is going to be just, think of it like a whiteboard that we all get to write on. We're going to put it up on the screen, and we want to ask a, Maurice is excited about the Jamboard. We're going to put it up on the screen. And I think it's here. Let me quickly open my screen. So the Jamboard is an opportunity for everyone to feed in their ideas. And the question here we would like everyone to answer is, what types of othering terms have you heard or may have used unknowingly? This could be in a job posting. This could be in the workplace. So this is how the Jamboard works. So on the left-hand side of your screen, you'll see a little square box that looks like a little Post-it. And if you click on it, let me click on mine here so you can see me. There's mine. And the sticky note will open. Oh, you need the link. Yes. Let's send the link to everybody. Apologies. I think I could send the link here. Chat box. All right. So if you click on the link, did everyone get the link? Nope. Here we go. Try it again. If you click on that link, and on the left-hand side, you'll see a little square. It's the fourth icon from the top. And it is a little digital sticky note pad. And when you click on it, okay. Is everybody on it? There's mine. So if you click on the link, so the question is, what type of othering terms have you heard or may have used unknowingly? I'm going to put a few that I actually saw in job postings recently. And you can change the color of your stickies if you'd like. This is fantastic. And I'm sure there's many more. So we'll leave that Jamboard up for a little bit. If you'd like to, add more, this is wonderful to see the varied ways language can take on another meaning, especially in the workplace. So if we go back to the conversation around job posting, and when you look at specifically New York City's civil service job posting and the varied way that they're all written, it really prompted me to recall some of the ways that in the past I've written job descriptions, and I try to do even now. And that is really not only having an inclusive language, but having a very structured way of presenting the job and then using the language around competencies. And so I just need to switch back to my presentation. So this is an example of a job posting that has a much more inclusive language. So if you look at the description at the top, it has languages such as diverse, dedicated professionals, there's just challenging. The word is fun is used without connection to individuals, but just in terms of the environment is fun. And then it's structured really, really tightly. There's the statement of qualifications. The education is there, but there's no specific time frame indicated for when a person has completed the degree that's required for the position. Unlike many of the ones I'd seen, where it's very specific to when you've graduated, this example shows you that it could be pretty open. And the next section is called experience. And if you look closely, and I'm sorry it's really tight in terms of the writing, but I just wanted to make sure everyone got a sense of the entire image. There is sound, there's significant. Sound and significant are terms that are defined at the bottom that really shows sound meaning 1 year of experience, significant means 3 years or more of experience. And there is value in experience, and it's differentiated. And I think that's an important feature as well. And the second slide, it continues to talk about knowledge. Again, knowledge for what you need to do the job well. It's not so specific to just that one particular job. It's that cross knowledge. And this for me is absolutely my favorite section, the competencies. What competencies are really needed to perform this job and to perform this job well? And we're going to speak a little more to the competencies in a moment. And at the bottom, it talks about the organizational need. There's additional information. And if you see it and it's not highlighted, there is an email. Although this is an application that you would go through an ATS system, there is an email account there so that if you are an applicant and you were not able to apply through the full system, you can actually still have a way to contact the hiring process or the individuals doing the hiring. And so let me go back to the conversation around competencies. So competencies really give you the most flexibility to pick the best candidate based on your need. And competencies are really important because competency-based assessments probably are well used around the world in many bureaucracies because they've been found to be most inclusive, fair, and consistent in keeping ourselves in check with our unconscious bias. And some of the benefits of competency-based assessment, it hopefully tries to eliminate as much bias as possible. It gives a consistency in the recruitment process. You're assessing an applicant's ability to perform the job going forward. It provides clarity and feedback if there's an opportunity to give that feedback to the candidate. And if you are really looking at the candidate that is the best fit for the job, then hopefully you should have a pretty low turnover because you're not distracted by these other biases that oftentimes creep into the whole hiring process. So how do you really weave in the competency process? And to do competencies, it's really important to have clear definitions and to have a really well-designed rubric tool. It's the assessment tool where it's, if you look at the screen, it's got a question on the left, it's got the measurements in the middle, it's got the definitions that I'm looking to measure. And then in the middle, what you don't see is really a descriptive way for what is a high meet, what is a meet, what's a low meet, what is a fail in this response. I think someone has a question. Jeanette, did you want to ask your question?
Well, it was just an observation
Sure.
that, you mentioned that on the last slide that they had a link or some other contact information, but I'm just wondering, even expanding it beyond age, are we limiting applications socioeconomically by limiting
Absolutely.
application for jobs to an electronic process? I mean, I know that most people do, I guess you can go to the library, et cetera. But I mean, the city really got exposure to that issue when they saw like children who didn't have access to computers. And so if the children don't have access, that would mean that the parents don't have access. So.
And it goes back to that idea of having live support, being able to do by phone, being able to have walk in and actually being able to have in-person service. It's great to move to this level of automation. I love automation, but there has to be that flexibility to still provide in-person or telephonic services.
Yeah, it's an important point. I didn't think of it.
Absolutely. Yep, absolutely. And not just for hiring processes, the hiring process, but for all access to government programs and services. So let's talk a little bit back to the rubric tool. The rubric tool is really to measure the candidates against the assessment tool and not against each other. And I think sometimes when we are very involved in the interview process or the assessment process, we start to get lost in comparing candidates to one another. Oh, well, I think this candidate was a little stronger in this area than this candidate. It's not about the candidates competing with one another. It's about what are you looking for? What is the vacancy you're trying to fill? What are the competencies you need to perform this job, this task really well? And I think that's really what the takeaway here with competencies is. And it's not an easy thing to just switch over to competency-based assessment. It does take a lot of finessing and learning how it works and working with well-designed assessment tools as well. The questions have to be well constructed, the measurements have to be clearly designed, and the definitions are really clear and written out. And so we thought maybe, it's for fun, let's do a little activity with everyone. Here are some competencies and from a competency dictionary that we want to break everyone out in different rooms. So the first competency is client focus. Second one is communication. The third one is initiative. And the fourth one is working with others. We're going to split everyone in a different room. So room 1, 2, and 3, your competency will be client focus. Those of you in room 4, 5, and 6, your competency will be communication. And in room 7, 8, 9, your competency is initiative. And room 10, 11, and 12, working with others. Now the exercise. The exercise is to take the definition or the competency, the definition of the competency, and to come up with, could be an interview question, it could be a written type of question that you may ask a candidate for a job. Please make sure to, 1, take a picture of the competency here. We'll also put them in the chat so that you have the actual definition. And 2, please make sure you have someone who's going to report back out or at least share the example question that you were able to come up with. Again, sometimes, and I'll give you a little hint, the most simple question is all it takes. So, okay, so I'm getting a little message. It looks like we've got 6 to 7 rooms. So maybe we will have, let me switch this a little bit. So let's have room 1 and 2, client focus, room 4 and 5, communication, room 6, sorry, 1, 2, 3. Oh, I'm missing the number 3. Okay. So we're gonna have 1, 2, client focus, 3, 4, communication, 5, and 6. You are initiative, and working with others will be 7, and possibly if we have an 8th room. So let me put the definitions also in the chat box because I think that will be easier for everyone. All right. So client focus. Here. 1 and 2. Room 3 and 4. Communication. Room 5 and 6. Initiative. And room 7, and if we have a room 8, we'll have working with others. We'll have, if it's okay, about 10 minutes, come up with a question. What isn't a good question do you think would be appropriate to ask applicants for a job? It could be a writing exercise type of question, or it could be an oral question you would ask at an interview, using this as the competency that you're working with. So I think with the support of the team here, we're going to have everyone break out in the rooms, and you'll have 10 minutes. So it's right now 1:13. So 1:23, we'll return to the room, and the selected rep for each room will share out. We'll give everyone another minute or two to join the larger group. Wonderful to see so many familiar faces. So who's interested in sharing out? Our first competency was client focus, an underlying concern for helping internal and/or external clients and for being responsive to their concerns. So that was room 1, and I believe room 2, client focus was the competency assigned.
Hi, this is Angelita.
Hi, welcome.
Yeah, so in our group, we were talking about, this is the question we came up with. Can you share or tell us about a current or previous experiences as it relates to this position to which you're applying to? Oh, I'm sorry, my video. Yeah, so we just posed the question as far as to just share with us your current or previous experiences as it relates to, depending on what the position is. Say it's if you had in previous investigative, it's a position for an investigator.
That's a great question. It's open, it's simple, and it allows that applicant to draw from their experiences and share. Excellent. Do we have another example from for client focus from room 2?
Hello, good afternoon. This is Imani. I was in room 2.
Hi, Imani.
Hello. We had basically very similar kind of questions. Just tell me about your previous job experience that you feel is pertinent to this role, and keep it kind of open-ended and go from there and let them kind of tell their story.
Excellent. Another really open question. It's inviting a conversation. It is inviting that applicant to share.
Oh, sorry, my video, but yeah.
Okay. Great to see you. Excellent. Let's move to communication. Competency number 2, folks that were in room 3 and 4. So communication, the ability to express oneself clearly, concisely, and openly, both orally and in writing, to effectively exchange information and ideas with others, and to demonstrate understanding, respect, and appreciation of others' perspectives. A lot of wonderful words in that one. Room 3 or room 4, rep?
So I'll go, I don't remember what room we were in, but we didn't come up with a specific question, but we spoke about the type of questions that we probably shouldn't ask, or that what we should do. So one of the things that we thought about was tell me about a time or a situation. But then one of the response was, what if that person doesn't have a work experience or school to draw back from? So maybe we want to be mindful of that and maybe phrase the question is, if you were in this situation or if this happened, how would you, handle, communicate and so forth? Or it could be creating a scenario and the person had to do a written sample. Because you can test it in writing, so the person can write something out. So we wanted to be mindful of that as well and figuring out the different ways that they can communicate that part to us without having them draw back at a previous school or educational or work experience that they may not have.
That's wonderful. And I love what you shared, which was that one of the type of questions you were asking is really a situational question. You're putting that person in a certain sort of environment and really assessing how they would, respond to that situation. Great. Do we have anyone for room 4 who is open to sharing?
Yeah, this is Lois McCluskey from Housing Development Corp. One of the things we were saying, we didn't quite come up with our question, but basically what we talked about is that we all had, questions in this competency of communication that we've asked our applicants, and they're all pretty much open-ended, but one of our colleagues in the room said something important. I thought that, you want to be mindful this person may not have led a team. So for it to be more inclusive, if you're going to say, tell me about a time you either led a team or perhaps were on a team where you observed or participated in communication and conversation, that if it wasn't respectful, how did you intervene? And, just to tell us about your experiences. But I thought that that was a good call out, to not assume that all of us have led teams.
That's great. And can I just add one piece that's really important with communication? And that was the written piece. And I don't know about you, but I've been to many interviews. I've applied for a lot of jobs, and very few ever actually assess my ability to communicate in writing. And could be possibly a little scary. You could be surprised. You'd be amazed how many people have other folks writing their cover letter and resume for them.
I love writing samples. Yeah.
Yeah. And I always say there's nothing like a good cover letter, which we don't see very often anymore.
Yes,
So.
the art of cover letter.
Great
Absolutely. Absolutely. But yes, written communication, oral communication is big. And, in that competency, there was a lot of really great, rich words that you also want to be able, as the hiring team is able to really understand what is the meaning behind those words as well, which is great. Thank you so much for sharing. So let's move on to initiative. I love this word. I love this competency. Initiative.
Hi, good afternoon.
Sure.
So Melangeli Lopez, EO investigator at DCAS. We were in room 5. And the question that we came up is, instead of a situational, we made it a behavioral question. So drawing back to previous experience, not necessarily work related, but just experience in general. Our question was, tell us about a time you took a proactive approach in solving a problem. What steps did you take and what was the outcome?
That's fantastic. And remember these examples, maybe they took an action and it didn't work well, but they're able to communicate that, the initiative was there, even if maybe there were things that didn't. It's not so much the result of that initiative, but more of the initiative itself, right?
Yes.
In very inclusive language, it's your experience. I love situational questions. Maritza and I are, very much, we love these types of opportunities really to bring that applicant out and open in those discussions. I think, did we have another room for initiative? I think we might have had one more room.
Yes, I'm speaking for group 6, and our group, like group 5, had talked about scenarios and the concept of managing up and asking people how they were proactive, whether they were going to flag an issue for manager or what have you. But since that's already been said, we also talked about focusing on the job description, multitasking, and asking them what is your strategy to address problems before they happen? And if you can tell us, of a time in the past where you've made a mistake, and if you made that mistake, what did you do after you made the mistake?
That's a wonderful question. Invites the applicant to share, and there is some space for that vulnerability as well. And they're not going to be judged on the vulnerability of sharing, right? It was a learning moment. Great question. I think we had maybe just one room, which is room 7, working with others. Anyone in room 7 who would like to share? Anyone in room 7? So openness to others from diverse backgrounds and a concern for relating to others in a cooperative and ethical manner. If you'd like, I can give you a quick one right now as I was thinking about it. And I love the tell us of a time, or it could be, you're in a situation where you're working with a colleague who has not completed their task, and it's the end of the day, and your task is due first thing in the morning. What would you do? So you're really looking for, how do they relate to their colleague? Are they going to go to a supervisor? How do they address that challenge? They are mindful that they have a colleague they're working with, or could be a friend, whatever the task at hand was. And once they're able to give you their response, look for those prompts. Did you seek advice from anyone else? Did you ask for help from anyone else? You're also looking for those other competencies as well. I just love really wonderful questions that are really inviting to the applicant to get to know them more and really assess what do they think, what the job opportunity will look like once they're there. That's great. Thanks, Maritza. All right. I hope everyone enjoyed this activity. And you recognize how challenging sometimes it is to come up with really good questions. And many of your questions were similar, in terms of there's a situation, inviting a conversation. And really that's what we're looking for in an interview. So I just want to switch to the interview process itself. And being in workforce and having been in workforce for a long time, oftentimes we tell clients that, be very careful with the interview. They're making judgment within the first 2 minutes, as soon as you walk in the door. And unfortunately, that is the reality in some industries. But as we're trying to move more in this inclusive culture and being mindful of all of the different isms that exist, one of the most safest way to really ensure that there is a fair assessment of all applicants is the selection board process, or the selection panel. And again, we all have a subjective lens in how we receive and deliver information, and the interview process is really no different. And to safeguard a fair and equitable inclusive process, having a panel of diverse cross-functional staff, which means it could be the manager, it could be from another unit, it could be someone who's at level, it could be someone who may be the colleague of this new applicant. In some instances, I've seen some government agencies do this, have an external partner, maybe a provider is also at that table, who will actually conduct the interview for that particular competition. You want to make sure you're using that rubric framework tool so that you are not measuring the candidates against one another. It happens, it really does. So that's why having that rubric right in front of you really puts the safeguard there. You want to make sure your questions are well constructed. You want to test, and test again. That these are questions that really are supposed to draw the best in that applicant's response, and you're really measuring the competency that you say you're measuring versus something else. They're questions, there are actually questions and answer dictionaries that do exist for this type of process that are accessible as well. You want to make sure all interview panels are trained and they're guided by policies and procedures with a lens of equity and diversity and inclusion. And the best way to do this is to make sure you've got at least 3 individuals who are forming that panel, and that they're not necessarily all buddies with one another, but individuals from really different positions, different roles, and have a really different sort of understanding, engage on the whole hiring process. Successful interviews are always guided on the principle of wanting to know the person who will ultimately perform the job. In examples that we just covered: behavioral questions, situational questions, in-basket exercises. So that's an exercise where you give the candidate a series of tasks and ask them to put them in a certain order and see what their rationale is. You want to set the stage for success, and what that looks like and feels like, and at least this is when I'm doing hiring, I give all applicants the question right in front. So they have it as I'm reading it out loud. No filters, no prompting, no follow-up questions. I ask the question that's in front of them. I give them plenty of time to respond. I give them pen and paper if they need it, or any other tools that they need to help, compose their response. You give them time, and you want to make sure you set the stage that, yes, we are taking notes, we are listening, but you want to give plenty of opportunity for the interview to actually happen. So you're not rushed and the other person is also not rushed. And most importantly, I always think, would my process withstand a litmus test? If someone else were to look at how I interviewed this individual, would I feel that I was fair and equitable in that process? Which means taking down notes. You want to take down notes of the actual process, take down notes of what they say, take down notes of the response, take down notes if you had to initiate prompting. And you want to make sure when you're complete with those notes, you're comparing it against that rubric that you set, and that when it's just not a casual conversation about that applicant. Real structured. And you want to make sure that candidate scores, as they range, that you're really looking at the candidate with the high score on the competencies you need for your particular position. And if you are not finding the best candidate, it's okay, we keep looking. I don't know if anyone is interested in sharing a little bit about some of their own interview experiences, whether you've been on the interviewer side or if you've been on the interview side. I've seen a lot of different types of interviews. Some were quite unusual, and some were really well designed and well structured. And so they really won the gamut. And I think when you're in the civil service, it really behooves us to be extra diligent in that process. Anyone interested in sharing a little bit of an interview experience they've had?
I know, if I may, just because
Sure.
the topic of ageism, I interviewed for a tech company, where the panel was much younger than me, and I definitely felt, there were definitely some ageist questions, in terms of when I graduated, in terms of, how much do I know about the tech, environment. And it was very deflating.
Yeah. And it throws you off during the whole process, I'm sure.
Yeah, I cut the interview short because that's just me. But, yeah, but terrible.
Yeah. Anyone else interested in sharing?
I've run the gamut. It hasn't been as bad as all that. That was pretty bad that you just described, but they've run the gamut. And I think the fairest, interview processes that I've been through are ones that are exactly, following this model that you just described. Have a panel where they're clearly using questions that are the same for each individual candidate. And they've divvied up the questions. You can kind of tell. And if it's preceded by a writing sample test, it's even better. So, so that's the good side of things. But we've also all had the bad side of things where, as the last speaker just described, there's a group that is completely, or potentially lacking in diversity, where you have just, a multi-person interview panel, but they're not a diverse cross-function of staff and or age or any other characteristic, including race, in those types of interviews where, like the last person that just spoke, you walk away with thinking, wonder what's going to happen there.
Mhm. Yeah. I think there are many stories. So thank you, Janet, for sharing, but many interesting stories out there about individuals' experiences with interview processes for sure. And so, on the screen that you're seeing right now, the equitable selection practices, really just things to consider: competencies, making sure the interview panel is diverse, trained, multi-person. We're always committed to a just and fair process. I mean, that needs to be just the standard across the board. And I say this not only just if it's an external process, but also if it's an internal process and you may know the applicants, because maybe it's an internal government hiring and some of the applicants are your colleagues, and you want to make sure that just and fair lens is, applied to everyone. So really quickly, 9 action steps researchers suggest for employers to strengthen age diversity and inclusion in the workplace. AARP had a really interesting article that they recently had shared. And some of although there's 9 there, some of the ones that really stood out to me is having an age inclusive talent recruitment strategy. And what does that really mean and look like for your individual agencies? Invest in lifelong learning opportunities. This is my passion. Making sure learning opportunities are available to all staff at all times, which means it's not just, a privilege if you are the new hire, but that learning opportunities are always present for everyone. Be aware of unconscious bias. This is a little challenging and a little trickier, but there are some ways we can do that, like the Harvard bias, implicit bias exercise earlier. Provide diversity training to managers, especially those with hiring responsibilities. This is really imperative so that everyone who has that power to do the hiring is actually working with the same type of training and is much more informed. And finally, adopt an age inclusive practice and enforce policies which combat age discrimination. So it's not just adopting a strategy, but putting mechanisms in place to address when there are problems as well. That includes, making sure your HR is accessible, etc. So after today's presentation, we just wanted to share with everyone a recruitment and hiring selection process challenge based on some of the different criteria we discussed. We hope everyone could take this challenge on. And that is, from this list of 10 that we covered today, what do you think you are able to take back and challenge yourself with? And some include complete the self-check, the implicit bias exercise, which we'll share in the chat. Share the 16 types of hiring bias and how to prevent them. That's also a really interesting article that you can share with your colleagues. Advocate to revamp agency website to add marketing language that attracts diverse candidates. Believe it or not, many of our agencies do not necessarily have that diverse language. Share DEI goals publicly and hold yourself and others accountable. Review your agency job posting for ageist or biased language. Conduct a review of your agency's resume screening process. How are resumes really screened at your agency? Can we commit to selection process training for agency staff? It could be something small, specific to your agency, or something a little larger. Implement an inclusive rubric tool in the assessment of applicants. Many of us are doing the job descriptions at our desks and making sure we can afford ourselves time to set up a rubric tool when we're assessing applicants applying for those vacancies. Making sure we have a interview panel that's comprised of, it could be direct peer, cross-functional peer, direct report, or the hiring manager. And finally, designing any hiring tools that consider targets of growth, use, underutilization, and expectations. So look at the New York City Agency C's report and beyond. These are just some of the different challenges that we can all hopefully take back to our respective agencies. And I think we've got a quick poll for you, if I'm not mistaken.
Yes, we do. So I'll be launching the poll of the 9 action steps researchers suggest for employers, and everyone can choose more than one. So I'll launch the poll right now. Can everyone see the poll?
Yes, thank you.
Providing opportunities for workers to remain and grow on the job seems to be coming out up on the top, which is so great and so inclusive.
I heard that one so much. So maybe I could share a little bit over here at DIFTA. We've committed to something. One of our priorities is learning plans. And learning plans are something beyond your task and standard and your performance evaluation. Learning plans is a plan that is guided by the staff member in terms of what are their career growth, what are their learning plans, and how can we in management and leadership support them. And I think it's really important that staff members feel they can drive their career and their learning. I really appreciate everybody's time attending and participating. I know sometimes it's a little challenging putting ourselves out there and being a little vulnerable and speaking publicly, but it really provided for a very rich conversation. And it's wonderful for those who were able to share their stories, had the space to do so.
Thank you, Sabine, and thank you, everyone. You know, to me, I'm a lifelong learner, so I'm always learning things, and so I was really happy to hear again about these situational questions, right? And how seeing it through a lens of equity, right, and inclusivity. So I thank you so much, Sabine, for your expertise, and I thank everyone that joined us because it's really beautiful out today. So thank you for being with us, and wanted to remind you that the second part of the series will be on July 20th, and we're going to be focused on training for today's multi-generational workforce, upskilling and advancement, sections 6 and 7, I believe, of the diversity plans. So we will be sending this PowerPoint. We're going to edit the video and share it with everyone that was here today, also folks that were not able to join us, and we're going to continue the conversation. I thank you so much. I wish you a great rest of the week, a great, long weekend. Stay safe, healthy. Thank you so much. See you again soon.
Thank you so much. We really appreciate it.
Thank you, Janet.
Thank you. Have a wonderful,
Yeah, everybody have a great holiday.
hopefully long weekend. Yes, absolutely.